Hello everyone, this is Mark Rivera of Genre Online Net YouTube channel, and this is my audio commentary for the 1959 public domain classic film House on Haunted Hill, starring Vincent Price and directed by the great William Castle. This is another one of my experiments that I did where I manipulated certain things for a desired effect. The film uses great techniques that still hold up today, in my opinion, with regard to creating eerie atmospheres and being quite scary, beginning with this image here.
The ghosts are moving tonight, restless, hungry. May I introduce myself? I'm Watson Pritchard. In just a minute, I'll show you the only really haunted house in the world. Since it was built a century ago, 7 people, including my brother, have been murdered in it. Since then, I've owned the house. I've only spent one night there, and when they found me in the morning, I was almost dead.
There will be some points in this commentary where I won't say a word because I want you to get the atmosphere of the scene as it is going in the film. Now, I have to tell you that in addition to Vincent Price, I think that William Castle definitely got his money's worth from Elijah Cook Jr., who is actually credited as Elijah Cook in this film, and he is the gentleman that plays the first face that you see of Watson Pritchard. My idea for this part of the film was that when we introduce these characters and when something supernatural happens, I would take it into a very stark and inky black and white type of picture. So this is actually darker than the actual film print. I've manipulated it purposely to make it seem very black and white and to emphasize that duality and mix of yin and yang in the film. In addition to that, you'll notice that there is a green hue that I have for the outside scenes of the house. These are only used for the scenes outside of the house, and the reason for that is I wanted to give it a kind of sickly, rotted texture to it. I just felt that in addition to this stark black and white introduction and scary scenes that we'll see later, that it was very important to just give a tone of that this house is rotten, it's rotting. But what we don't know yet is whether it is rotting because of the ghosts that may or may not exist within it, or is it the people that are about to enter that compound the problem. In addition to this, you'll notice inside the house, once we get to it, instead of the regular black and white picture, I've chosen a more rustic brown color. Now, when the film was first announced through theatrical trailers, the title was going to be The House on Haunted Hill. However, all theatrical prints that I'm aware of name it as House on Haunted Hill. This film is probably one of my favorite films that still holds up today. It's a classic low-budget B-movie that it just works on every level. It even arguably leaves things up to the viewer as to what they see, and I'll point that out here and there. It does a great job with creating false trails, and it also gives you moments where there's foreshadowing that's all paid off by the end of the film. It's really well done. Now, this house that they filmed the exteriors for is by in Los Feliz, California, and it was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1924. But the bulk of the film was actually shot inside using different combinations of styles, including 1890s Victorian with gas chandeliers and sconces. The architecture of the house is quite striking. It looks almost Art Deco and perhaps even brutalist in its style of the way it's brick faced and the little indentations and touches on it. Now, of course, I could be using some of these words wrong. I leave that to the art history and architects if I'm wrong about the exact styles. But regardless, it was definitely a great location for the exterior scenes. And now we are going to go directly into the house, and we transition into that rustic toned black and white, brown and white type of motif. And the reason why I did this once again is that I want to give the interior of the house just to make it look old, even older than the black and white print usually reveals. And this film has been released many times on DVD, VHS, and even on Blu-ray disc. In fact, I believe the last time it was released on Blu-ray disc was through Shout Factory as a part of the Vincent Price Collection Volume 2. Nevertheless, this film is in the public domain, which is why I'm able to present both the film and this film with the audio commentary that I'm recording for it intact. As we can see here, we're basically being introduced more to the characters. In some ways, if there was one little critique I had for the film, it's that it kind of doesn't exactly repeat information, because it actually really gives you the information and the setup step by step, but it kind of, instead of giving you the rules all at once, sometimes because of the fact that it goes step by step with brief pauses where you don't know exactly what's going on, the fact of the matter is that it could almost appear as though information is being repeated verbally, but believe it or not, it's not. And I'm going to have a specific scene where you'll see that in the film. And here's the great Vincent Price in one of his best roles, in my opinion. And Vincent Price has had an illustrious career. In this film, he plays the millionaire who is a bit eccentric, and he has a wife that he believes wants him dead. Now, Al Bundy never had anything on Vincent Price, for those of you familiar with Married with Children, which was a show that aired in the late 80s and early 1990s on the Fox network on broadcast television. I just love the mannerisms and the acting here. The person who plays his wife also does a great job, but Vincent Price, in every scene he's in, practically steals the movie just with his own unique style and prissy, if you will, demeanor. This is probably one of the better scenes in this introduction regarding their relationship, so here it is.
Why do you always do that? It spoils the champagne.
It might explode.
Never does.
Will you guarantee that?
That isn't funny, Frederick.
Make a good headline. Playboy kills wife with champagne cork. Will you join me?
No, thank you.
Just a sip might improve your humor.
My humor is fine, thanks. And I haven't poisoned it.
It's always good to know that. Have some. You'll enjoy the party more. Go on.
Your trust is so touching. And I'm not going to the party.
Of all my wives, you're the least agreeable.
But still alive.
Would you go away for $1 million and tax-free? You want it all, don't you?
I deserve it all. Your jealousy isn't tax-free. And your possessiveness is maddening.
If ever a man had grounds for divorce.
But can't prove them.
The time will come. You'll slip up one of these days.
Think so?
If I live long enough. You remember the fun we had when you poisoned me?
Something you ate, the doctor said.
Yes. Arsenic on the rocks. Annabelle. You'd do it again if you thought you could get away with it, wouldn't you?
Darling, what makes you think that?
Something about you. I hear that hanging is very uncomfortable, in case you get any more ideas.
Once here, now there will be spoilers in this commentary, and one of them is the way the film foreshadows things, such as the last line we heard here before my commentary continued. As we can see, we have the cast now introduced. We've established the relationship between the wife. Now we get to see Elijah Cook Jr.'s character, who I would say outside of Vincent Price is probably the second biggest scene stealer, just because he's got great character in his face and he really does do a great job playing somebody who is not quite right in the head, but you don't know whether he's harmless or whether he might in fact be dangerous. About the only thing you do know about his character is that he absolutely believes the house is truly haunted. There was a 1999 remake produced by Dark Castle Productions, which is a company started by Robert Zemeckis. Among many filmmakers that Robert Zemeckis is a fan of, William Castle is one of them. So his company produced some feature film remakes of his classic films, including one that came out in 1999 that starred Jeffrey Rush and Famke Janssen. And basically, the main difference between this version and the 1999 version is, personally, I like this movie partially because I feel that it's arguable whether or not the house is truly haunted. In my opinion, it's open to interpretation because there are some scenes here that don't really have a good explanation. And yet, there are also scenes that are completely believable and are explained away very well. So, it's one of those films where it depends how you want to perceive it. And I like that. I like being given a choice of how I want to perceive this. And quite honestly, I think the house might be haunted, but I can't say for sure. What I do know is that the difference between this version and the 1999 remake is the 1999 remake absolutely positively does not leave any ambiguity as to whether or not the house is haunted. Jeffrey Rush does a great job, as does Famke Janssen, and you even have Jeffrey Combs in the remake, and he's always a welcome sight as being the character actor made most famous probably from his role in Reanimator. However, here, I think this 1959 version is still the better film, and that's nothing against the filmmakers or Robert Zemeckis who produced the film remake. I just feel that this is a classic on the level that well, when you make something this good, you really can't perfect it. All you can do is copy it. And I'm not the only one who feels this way, because none other than Alfred Hitchcock saw this film, and he was a fan of this film. In fact, he took notice of the film's low budget and decided that he would do his own low budget thriller, which came out to be his hit 1960 film, Psycho. William Castle, who was himself a Hitchcock fan, would later try to imitate Hitchcock's work in films such as Homicidal, released in 1961. Now, one of the gimmicks, because William Castle is famous for gimmicks, is something called emergo, which is mentioned in the trailers. And basically what that was is, at a certain point in the screening, a skeleton is released out and hangs over the audience in the screening room. And combined with what's going on at the screen at the time, it's supposed to make the horror environment more, I guess, immersive, hence it being called emergo. The film also had a book release that came out later, and in the book, which was released in September of 2011, it contains the original screenplay along with Castle's margin notes on the shooting script. It's leather bound, and it includes an introduction by another famous William Castle fan, the great Joe Dante, and William Castle's daughter, Terry Castle, and her own version of emergo, which the readers via flip page can see their own scare come to life. Now, here's the vat of acid in the film, and my only problem with this is I could suspend my disbelief completely and say to you, okay, there's a vat of acid, but who puts a big vat of acid like that? And if you know it exists, why would you leave that open? Why would you not, at the very least, get rid of the trap door or get rid of the acid or something? I don't know. Honestly, it's just one of those things where you have to suspend your disbelief and accept it. A sequel to the film was released in novel form called House of Haunted Hill Resurrection, and it was written by Gary J. Rose and published in 2023. It's a contemporary reimagining of Vincent Price's film, but it actually takes place 20 years after the events of this film. Besides the 1999 remake, in 2017, a original remake again was being developed, written by William Castle's daughter Terry. As of yet, I don't know whether or not the film is still in development or not, but I do think that it's worth noting, which is why I've mentioned it. We're going to be coming up soon to one of the first scares in the movie that is kind of explainable and yet unexplainable. William Castle really did a great job at setting these up because they still stand up today, in my humble opinion. It's just really filled with otherworldly effects that, for lack of a better expression, this is the type of stuff that I think young filmmakers could learn a lot from, because you don't need a lot of money to scare people. It's all a matter of how you use what's in the picture, how you frame it, and the use of sound. So when we want to create something eerie, we switch, in my version of this film, which is really just a version of it. I mean, this is not a product or something like that. This is just my own little take on the film. But here is the first supernatural moment. Positively creepy, in my humble opinion. This will only be intensified throughout, and as you could see, once again, I changed the color for that stark black and white just for the supernatural or ghostly apparitions. However, I think you should all know that unlike my take on The Last Man on Earth, which I did last month for this channel, this particular version of the film, I'm actually being much more conservative in terms of my artistic choices as to manipulating the color and the lighting and that sort of thing. See, my whole thing is I want you all to look at something and realize that it's like being in a film editing class. When I was in film school, in Film Editing 1, they gave everybody just random daily footage from various films, both black and white and color, on 16 millimeter, and our job was to create something out of it. And of course, we were supposed to demonstrate some sort of editing method, and if you were lucky, you would have some good footage that you can edit together that would basically work in such a way that the professor would accept it and not ask you any questions. But I have to admit, when I had my little editing project, none of it made sense. It's like there was just no scene that I had that matched or belonged with another. So I just did the best I could, and all I can remember telling the professor was, well, I'm using the Kuleshov method here. And, well, I kept mentioning Kuleshov over and over again until I guess she bought it. But nevertheless, despite my little mishap with editing daily footage from random films to try and make something, here in the days of digital, you could take footage, which I've done as examples here that you can see on this channel, where you manipulate the picture, where you can cut down images. I've literally taken sequences that are a half hour and edited them down to 60 seconds so that I can make it into a short. And for what it is, you get all the information that you need. I've done this for the famous Carol Burnett version of Gone with the Wind, and I've also done this with a few of Steven Spielberg's films like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Just very small, short edits of a specific sequence, especially for the one in Close Encounters, which I basically intermixed that with footage of Rodney Dangerfield from a commercial he made in the 1980s. Does it work 100%? I'll let you all be the judge of that. But nevertheless, I love genre films, and that's what I've been into since I was a little kid, watching Chiller on Saturday nights on what was WPIX Channel 11 before it became the CW11, and that's a real long time ago now. And, well, basically, I find that when you watch movies like this, you know, you can take things. For example, there's a famous play, Nicholas Nickleby, based on the book. And in it, this based on the Dickens book, Nicholas Nickleby has a sequence where they kind of repeat Romeo and Juliet, but they show you how you can take certain elements from comedy and turn a tragedy into a comedy just by manipulating certain elements. Now, right now, we're going to come up to the second big sequence, so I'm just going to let you all take it in. I love the way not only the person just appears with that horrific expression, but the way she literally floats out, or at least that's as it appears. I think that, once again, it's one of the better scares in the film. I imagine that people who saw this in 1959 must have jumped out of their chair. Now, as I was saying before, there's a fine line between presenting a tragedy and comedy on film. Basically, if you're going to watch a tragedy, I remember learning in Shakespeare class in graduate school, you should sit as close as you can to the actors on stage, because tragedy tends to give you larger than life characters that are almost like iconic or archetypes. And so, you know, they should be towering over you in a sense, because it makes the effect and the catharsis, as well as the realization of the unwinnable scenario that these characters end up in a tragedy, that makes you have more empathy for them, even when they do horrible things. Whereas comedy is a lot more broad. For comedy, you should sit further away from the screen, unless it's a type of comedy where there's so many jokes that are visual and that you have to capture them all. Then I would say, yes, okay, get closer, but not so close that you can't see what's going on throughout the entire screen that you're using. But generally speaking, comedy you can watch from further away and get a good angle as to what's happening on screen and laugh. But if you're watching a tragedy, I agree with what I learned, which is closer is better for tragedy, but for me, wider and not in the front is better for comedy. And while this film is neither a tragedy nor a comedy, it has elements of that in there. And it also brilliantly sets up so many false trails that it really does keep you guessing as to what's going on, who's guilty of what, and who is the Vincent Price character. Why is he doing this? Well, as it turns out, Frederick Loren, that's the name of the character Vincent Price plays, has a plan, but he's not the only one. And we, the viewers, are left with the question, what is the plan and who's playing who? That's part of what makes this film work, in my humble opinion. Soon we'll be coming up to a major setup in terms of the rules of the game. And although that's a Jean Renoir film that I'm quoting now, the rules of the game really fits this movie perfectly, just as a phrase, because this really is a game on multiple levels. It's a game of poker, in a sense, because everybody is trying to present a type of mask, if you will. And at the same time, there is the bigger game, which is, one, is the house truly haunted or not? Which I think this film personally leaves open to interpretation, which is great in my humble opinion because of the fact that we all get to make our own take on it. We all get to watch a film and there is no right answer. And so I like a film that makes me think. And this is a film that I think you could argue, oh yes, the house is haunted, or no, the house is not really haunted. But the one thing's for sure is I think if you compare this to the 1999 version, at the very least, I don't think anyone would disagree that this is the more ambiguous film, because the 1999 film doesn't do anything that is ambiguous, let alone conservative. Although it's a good film, it just, in my opinion, pales against the original. And that happens sometimes. It's very rare that you'll get a remake of something that is as good as or better than the original. It's really very hard to do. You know, I find these sequences with Vincent Price talking to his wife to be great. He looks like he's just chewing up the scenery. He's a professional actor. He's, smiling. He's like really enjoying himself. In fact, I would say this is one of his best roles outside of, say, maybe the Roger Corman version of The Raven, which is an excellent Vincent Price Poe film. And if you haven't seen it, actually all the Poe films are good, but that particular one I find is one of my favorites from my childhood, watching it on the 4:30 movie, which, now I'm dating myself, but in the 1970s they used to show a lot more movies on television than they do today, because cable was just starting out and it was, HBO, and that's it. And then you had some public access channels that in Manhattan, but if you lived in the borough of Brooklyn like me, we didn't get cable until the mid to late 1980s. So now, we no longer have things like the 4:30 movie, which aired in the 70s and would have all sorts of films. But, there is one great thing, is that the world of streaming has opened up so many movie channels and so many services that will not cost a person a dime and are perfectly legal. Channels like Tubi, there's even free selections on Vudu, etc. There's a lot of great stuff that you can watch and it'll keep you entertained. And then you have services like Pluto TV, which kind of make up for your basic cable that you give up when you decide to go streaming and breaking the cord, as they say. Now, as we move along in this film, I find that it's important to remember that this is a film made on a shoestring budget, but look at the production value. I mean, not just the outside that I spoke about earlier, but this inside. I mean, they really get the most value out of it. And it's a great looking film with its use of shadow and lighting. It truly is, in my opinion, a classic that is maybe still underappreciated. But, there's not one person who I speak to that's familiar with House on Haunted Hill that does not have a positive reaction to the original. There's people I've met that have never seen the 1999 remake, but there's plenty of people that have seen the original 1959 film. People much younger than me, people much older than me, people my age, and they all love it. And that's with good reason. What we're going to have now is what I consider the definitive setting up the rules of the game for the movie. Those are the caretakers. And, well, when you see the film, which, by the way, I do have this film complete among the public domain library films that I have on my channel, so you can watch my take on this without my commentary, and there'll be a link in the description of this video. In the meantime, you know, it really is I don't think they make movies like this anymore. I mean, we used to have films like Clue and stuff like that in the 1980s, and even comedies like Murder by Death or whatever in the 1970s, and plays like Death Trap. But nowadays, the idea of creating like the horror mystery where you don't know who's who has given away to the slasher film.
Please. I think you all remember the bargain we made about staying all night. $10,000 apiece. If any of you don't survive, $50,000 will be divided amongst the rest of you. If I should die, you will be paid by my estate. When the door is locked from the outside by the caretakers, we'll all be forced to stay in this house until morning. If any of you decide not to stay, you must leave with the caretakers now. You won't have a chance to change your minds later, because there'll be no way to get out.
Absolute brilliant delivery by Price. You could not have gotten a better man for this role. Price actually is in a lot of movies, and not all of them are horror, as I've mentioned in my previous commentary for The Last Man on Earth. He's appeared in films like The Song of Bernadette and The Ten Commandments, and many others as well.
It isn't midnight yet. Who told them they could leave?
They never leave before midnight.
Well, they've gone now. I was going to ask you whether you wanted to stay or not, but it seems that the caretakers have made the decision for you. We're all locked in now.
But I don't want to stay.
I'm sorry, my dear, but it's too late now.
Darling, haven't you had enough of this silly game? Get some cars up here for these people and let them go home. But pay them first.
This is your party, remember? In spite of my wife's faith in my ability to do the impossible, we will all have to stay in this house until 8 o'clock in the morning. But we have some party favors for you in these little coffins. This is my wife's idea. I must say, I think it's rather dangerous. I suppose you all know how to use one of these things, but in case you don't, you just press down on this lever with your thumb and then pull the trigger.
Great setup. So now, pretty much, we know that the characters, what's at stake, they're surviving the night, they're stuck there now, the windows are barred, the house is locked, the caretakers will not be back until the morning, the choice of leaving has been removed, and now we begin the true cat and mouse game of the story. Now, as I was saying before, Vincent Price has had a very, very distinguished career that I think is at sometimes, you know, he got typecast in my humble opinion, but he was so good at what he did, and his natural speaking voice just lent to that, well, there's worse things in life than to be a genre film actor. I mean, I remember once I interviewed Bruce Campbell, and I was talking to him about his acting and, you know, in B movies, and about his book, Make Love the Bruce Campbell Way, which was basically about what if Bruce Campbell was put into an A-list movie directed by, you know, A-list filmmaker and starring what was then considered to be A-list actors and actresses. And when I asked Campbell, well, you're talented, you're a handsome guy, you could do acting in a mainstream film anytime. And he told me, no, I'm a character actor trapped in a leading man's body. I thought that was very interesting. And he told me that he embraced it. And so that's why to this day we have Bruce Campbell in the majority. I mean, he does work a lot, but we'll always associate him with B movies. But you know what? Once again, he's embraced that, and it's given him a very lucrative career and a lot of fans. And I think that you can say that of Vincent Price and Robert Englund, as well as Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, as well as Lon Chaney and Lon Chaney Jr. I mean, all of these people, Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing, all of these actors and actresses that we associate with genre films are actually not only well educated and well trained, but despite whatever typecasting may have occurred, they are beloved by their fans, and their fans have kept their memory alive, those who are not with us anymore, for decades since. And I believe they'll be remembered with every passing generation that falls in love with these movies, however they see them. Because no matter what they do to film, no matter how much they digitize it, no matter how many times they try to make it either on physical, which I prefer physical media, or pure digital, you're never going to get rid of film completely. I think film is here to stay as long as we are on this planet. So let's all play safe and keep film alive by keeping ourselves alive. Once again, I also like the diverse look of the actors here. Here, he's talking to the psychiatrist. That's one of the people there. You look at his wife. She has a certain personality. You look at the young girl who's sadly gets the most frightening sequences happen to her because she's I guess you could call her an early scream queen, at least for this movie. I don't know what other films she made. Then you have here, this looks like your leading man type. And then, of course, Elisha Cook Jr., who definitely has the character actor look. But outside of Vincent Price, I think he steals every scene in the movie. And overall, this film really works, like I said before, on multiple levels. It pays off everything. It foreshadows, and it sets up, like I said before, the false trails. And intrigue. Look at how Elijah Cook reacts here. He's just great. I mean, you just look at his hair, just everything about him, the way they dress him, the expressions he makes in his face, the way his hair is presented in the film. It's just, it makes him, in my opinion, one of the more interesting characters just to watch. He really gives his all in this film, as does everybody else. But it's just sometimes some people stick out more than others, and obviously he was meant to stick out. Now here's an example of foreshadowing. Early on, Vincent Price tells his wife not to hang herself. And now we see that that's exactly what's happened. She hung herself. Or did she? We'll have to wait till the end of the film to find out for certain. Nothing here is left to chance, though. Every scene, every character interaction forwards the story and builds upon the next scene. I think that this is probably one of the best screenplays of this type of movie to have been produced, which is why it doesn't surprise me that the shooting script was released in about 2011, I believe. Now, as we get closer in the film, there's going to be a sequence that I find questionable that I'll talk about now, which is a scene where we see rope wrap around somebody's ankle, by itself. Now, here's the problem with that scene. It's not that it exists, that's not the problem. And I would not remove it either. But it does offer that ambiguity of, well, if the rope is moving around by itself around somebody's ankle, then there has to be something making that happen. And yet, by the time we get to the end of the film and we know what the full story is, it turns out that the person who is associated with that rope was not a ghost at all. But how do you get rope in 1959 to do something like that on its own without strings or something that just basically gets it to do that? I honestly cannot say. But I do think it lends to that ambiguity in the film where, once again, I would argue that even by the end of this film, I'm not 100% sure whether or not the house on Haunted Hill is truly haunted. But I'll tell you this, I wouldn't want to stay there just in case. It's like one of those arguments where some people be like, well, believe in God, regardless of whether you believe or not. It's always better to believe in God, because if there's no God and you don't believe, well, then you might have some explaining to do. But if there is a God, if you believe there's a God and there's no God, well, you didn't lose anything, right? And maybe that faith will help you get through many hard times and good times alike. In other words, always be grateful. So, William Castle is known for many films. The Tingler is one of them, with Vincent Price again. 13 Ghosts, which was also remade in 2001. And he actually produced Rosemary's Baby, directed by Roman Polanski. And he actually insisted Roman Polanski direct that film. And Rosemary's Baby is definitely a classic of the genre. Sadly, William Castle passed away at the young age of 63 from a heart attack. It's a real shame, too, because he really does have a great body of work once you get past the gimmickry that he was known for, which was not always subtle. You really are dealing with somebody that, in his own way, was like a P.T. Barnum of the big screen. He doesn't have maybe the same respect that Hitchcock had, because Hitchcock is one of those master filmmakers that few truly can equal, because you're either a master or you're not. That's the way it is. I mean, there's some people that are just born so talented that, they're like Mozarts. You know what I mean? So, you have that, and then you have other people that aspire for greatness and achieve it on their own terms. And I think that you could say that about William Castle. He may have not been the most subtle filmmaker in terms of scary films, but you know what? This film and other films that he's directed and produced, including Rosemary's Baby, stand the test of time. And they work. And that's what makes them special. And that's why I think William Castle deserves the respect that he gets from other genre filmmakers like Joe Dante and Robert Zemeckis. I mean, Robert Zemeckis is an Academy Award-winning director, and he's done lots of great things artistically with rotoscope work and basically combining live action with animation using computers. And that's something that interests me a lot. That's part of the reason why I started doing this, was that I started to notice that some of these films would make great graphic novels. And, well, unfortunately, I can't draw for the life of me. And obviously, many of these films are copywritten, and they're not in the public domain, like House on Haunted Hill or The Last Man on Earth or Night of the Living Dead even. But nevertheless, you can take a short scene and remix it and re-edit it and make something else out of it that at the very least will qualify as fair use or as its own unique thing. It all depends on how much manipulation you do. And of course, unfortunately, sometimes no matter what you do, you're at the mercy of the intellectual property police, which sucks because unfortunately, whenever that's happened to me, I do a lot of research before I pick a film that I want to present. And one of the things I research is for public domain is I go into the records, I look at the U.S. copyright records, I consult different libraries. If I don't know something, I will write the U.S. Copyright Office about a film, and it takes maybe about 24 hours to a week, depending on who's there. But a librarian will get back to you, by email or whatnot. Sometimes there might be a fee attached to it, but if you're not sure about something, it's definitely worth considering. Another thing that's worth remembering is Creative Commons, which basically, in tandem with the global copyright laws, has enabled people to get a license to present a public domain film and present that license so long as they follow the rules that are set off in that license. So basically, I've had times where I've had someone claim copyright on a public domain film, and I've been able to successfully defend myself and win the popular vote of the person who originally made the claim, and basically, the copyright flagging was removed. Other times, though, it's much harder. Sometimes, I don't know how a film that's in the public domain could go off the public domain again, but it seems like that's a possibility with certain films. And then there are just certain films that are just unfortunately magnets that YouTube as a service has had problems with regard to the amount of attention these films get, even though they're in the public domain. So like there are a couple of films that YouTube won't let me upload at all, simply because the copyright law, however explicit it states that something is in the public domain, it's just been such a nuisance, I guess, for the people at YouTube that they just would rather prefer people not to choose that film. And unfortunately, since YouTube is a privately owned company, if I understand correctly, even if it's a publicly owned company, it's still their platform. So we're all, at the mercy of the YouTube gods, whether we like it or not. But that's okay, because I've also won cases big in terms of films that large studios claimed, oh no, that film is not in the public domain. And I've been able to prove successfully with an appeal even that the film was in the public domain. And when that happens, I got to tell you that you really feel good about yourself when that happens. I mean, I've thought about making a video for everyone about copyright law. And the only reason why I haven't done it is because I'm not a lawyer. And in the same way that only a broker is really qualified to give financial advice, like if you work on Wall Street and you're working for, let's say, a proxy solicitation firm, you have to let those people know who you're talking to that you're not a broker. You're not allowed to give financial advice. And pretty much, I'm not a lawyer. I can't give legal advice. And so I don't know if that would be violating the terms of service or, community guidelines that YouTube sets, which is why I haven't done it. But I could at least recommend to you all a few things, which is check with the U.S. Copyright Office, go to Creative Commons, and make sure that you read and follow the license for a film that's in the public domain. And last but not least, whatever you do, if you want to present a public domain film on a public platform like YouTube, be aware that you'll get more flies with honey, as they say. I think that's how it goes, than without. So getting an attitude doesn't work. Trust me. You can get pissed off all you want, but it's not going to help your situation. So always remain calm. Fortunately, I haven't had any claims in a long time, and hopefully I won't incur any. I haven't really been doing many public domain films as of late, mostly because I think I've pretty much ran through most of the major ones that people are interested in seeing that YouTube would allow me to upload, and that I have been able to successfully maintain as being in the public domain because of the amount of research that I do before I post something. And something that you should all keep in mind with public domain films and the research, and I wish YouTube understood this, is that part of the creative process is researching. And yeah, I may not be creating something like researching something natural to write a story about or create a film. But nevertheless, if I want to present a film in the public domain, I have to do the research and look for that license, find out if the film is globally in the public domain, because sometimes if you have a film, especially films like, for whatever reason, a film that I love called Horror Express, it's in the public domain, but I would not recommend anyone trying to upload it to their YouTube channel, because I've done it in both a stylized graphic novel rotoscope digitally version and an untouched presentation. And the film is a Spanish film, although it looks like a Hammer film. And more or less, basically, it's just not something that I've been able to successfully say that it's 100% in the public domain, because sometimes certain films that are in the public domain in the United States, especially if they're foreign films, they may not be in the public domain in that particular country or in other countries. And so I would love to do Horror Express, a commentary for that, because it's one of my favorite movies. But unfortunately, unless I just did it as an audio commentary where you have to listen to it, but you basically have to have your own copy of the movie watching it, or you'll have to take the commentary and sync it to whichever presentation of the film you see, including what I have in my public domain film library. I just don't think that the copyright gods would be pleased with me. So, ultimately, this is something that we all have to go through, that are interested in films and that want to, if something is in the public domain, that we want to share. Once again, great use of lighting here. And this is the rope scene that I was talking about earlier today. You see here how the rope moves. It comes in by itself. And this is the part that's questionable. How could a rope do that by itself unless it's being pulled by strings? And since it's clear that this woman in the context of the scene is not surrounded by, wires and that sort of thing, at least as the scene is set up, I don't know how a person can get a rope to wrap around somebody's ankles like that on its own. Unless, of course, there's some form of manipulation. So this is one of those scenes where it's both supernatural, or you could argue that it's supernatural, and yet it's also a false trail that if you've seen the movie already, you'll know why. And if you stick with this commentary this long, you're soon going to find out. So anyway, to me, part of the creative process is doing the research. And since I like doing the research, that's what makes it part of the fun, actually. And it's always good to do this type of research, because when it comes down to trying to prove your case, because YouTube does not get involved in copyright disputes, when it comes down to trying to do your own, defense, you better know everything there is to know and be able to say it concisely, because you only have one chance. And unless something is really and truly like a wrong has been done and you are 100% in the right and you can prove it, sometimes you have to pick your battles. And so, there are companies out there that I sometimes feel take advantage of people who are basically just film lovers and that want to be able to share films that are legally in the public domain, and we're not trying to steal anything. I mean, none of these videos that I have here are monetized, but nevertheless, sometimes you'll deal with companies that just deal with digital rights management. And I understand they got clients, and yes, everybody has a right to be compensated for the work that they do. I mean, that's part of the reason why the actors and the writers are on strike, is dealing in part with the residuals. Some of it with regard to how the actors and actresses are pursuing this. Well, I think the product in Hollywood hasn't been up to par as of late, with very few exceptions. But as a film lover, you take what you can get. But never forget that there is always great films that you can follow, whether they be in the public domain or not, just by streaming them on a service like Netflix or Amazon Prime, or a commercial service like Pluto TV or Tubi or something like that, where there are some advertisements. And Vudu, which is actually a premium service in terms of they provide digital copies in the same way that iTunes does. They're owned by Walmart. But unlike iTunes, every month or so, Vudu does have some films available to stream for free, but they probably have advertisements in between. Now we're going to get an important reveal here that, is related to the rope, and you'll understand very soon what I mean. Yes, the psychiatrist and the wife of Frederick Lauren, aka Vincent Price in the role, are scheming together to frame Mr. Laurent's character and kill him. If they can't frame him, kill him. that's one of the angles in the film that I like, and it pays off with something beautiful at the end that I'll go into and let you see for yourself. But here, we now know that the woman hanging herself, etc., that was all done using harnesses and stuff. But what you can't explain, which is, I think, part of the ambiguity, is, okay, but how did the rope naturally by itself wrap around that woman's ankles? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. If you have an idea as to how that occurred naturally without strings or pulleys, which would be difficult to hide if you're in a room like that in 1959, please post it in the comments, because I'm always interested in learning. So, that's why the comments in these films is there. I don't expect you all to agree with me. In fact, I prefer you think for yourself and come up with your own interpretations, because that's the only way that we learn. And that's really what I'm interested in, is perception and learning. Too much education nowadays is memorization and indoctrination, and not enough thought is put into critical thinking. And so that's another reason why I like doing these types of experiments or talking about film, because when you have a film that has some ambiguity to it, you are, for lack of a better expression, left to think using your own cognitive skills as to, what have I just watched? How believable was it? Okay, it suspended my disbelief, but was it something supernatural, or was it something else? I mean, the ambiguity in films is great. I think, when you look at some films like Ridley Scott's Prometheus, the problem with that film is the reason why nobody asked about what the space jockey was is that the mystery of the space jockey was far more enticing than knowing what the space jockey is. And then when you find out that the space jockey is a tall, bald, muscular man from another world, it's kind of a disappointment, because nothing in the world can match your imagination, you see. So always remember that. That's part of the reason also why when you're reading books, whether it be Melville's Moby Dick or Frank Herbert's Dune, that you're never going to have, as Harlan Ellison said, a type of agreement on what is the definitive cut or the definitive live action interpretation of a work of literature. They're two totally different mediums, and everybody has their own take. I mean, I love Denis Villeneuve's Dune. I think it's probably one of the best things to come out so far in the 2020s. However, I also love the David Lynch version, and I think that's an underrated classic. That's another film I would love to cover, but unfortunately it's not in the public domain. And, it's just not worth crossing that bridge if you don't have to, unless you can afford to get a license to do something on it. But I can assure you that if you were, it would probably be very hard to do, and it would probably cost you a lot of money. Now, this is a great payoff sequence here. It features a certain person just eating up the scenery, and a great effect that at this point the emergo effect in the movie theater would happen. The theater's dark, and then all of a sudden, just as you see and hear a strange voice calling out to you, the vat of acid opens, and out from it comes a skeleton, and the skeleton has an otherworldly vibe to it as it moves. And William Castle using puppeteering, did a fantastic job that, for the most part, still holds up very well today, of showing a skeleton seemingly moving on its own. So when this skeleton appears, I believe in the theater, a skeleton would come out down from the ceiling and hover over the people to add to the immersion of the film. And since the original screenings of House on Haunted Hill in 1959, there have been some revivals where that effect has been reproduced for the audience. Otherwise, even without that effect, this looks pretty darn good, especially since it's not, it's not even stop motion. It really, literally is puppeteering. And it works. I mean, is it perfect? Not by 21st century standards. But I don't need things to be perfect. I just need them to be believable. And so she meets her demise. The killers have been killed. And now, which I would imagine there'd be lots of screaming if you fell into a vat of acid. But hey, it's a movie, okay? And it's not an R-rated film as far as I know. So, it's not something that they're going to show. Nevertheless, this reveal is great. I mean, once again, Married with Children's Al Bundy had nothing on Frederick Loren as portrayed by Vincent Price. This is just a great, great scene. It's humorous. But what's even better than this scene is the scene that follows, which is, well, the film ends with its ambiguity, but what I really like about the way the film ends is that the Lauren character has to face justice, and we don't know what's going to happen because he has to prove that his life was in danger, and he has to prove, for whatever the reason, that he didn't murder his wife. And technically, you could say, while he was trying to protect himself, certainly the first person that tried to kill him deserved to get killed in return because it was self-defense, but what he does to his wife could be considered murder or some form of manslaughter.
It's him. He's alive.
You didn't shoot anyone, my dear. I loaded your gun with blanks. I can tell you all now. Trent and my wife were planning to kill me. They failed. Trent tried to throw me in the vat. My wife stumbled and fell. I'm ready for justice to decide if I'm innocent or guilty.
Now there are 9. There'll be more, many more. They're coming for me now. And then they'll come for you.
And that, my friends, is the end of House on Haunted Hill, and this concludes my commentary on it. I hope you all enjoyed it, and there'll be another one coming very soon. And in the meantime, I hope you all are having a great day, and please stay safe. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you very, very much.